In 1933, a French archaeologist trekking through a remote, wind-carved plateau in the Sahara Desert climbed into a shallow rock shelter and found himself staring up at a painting that, by every conventional measure, shouldn't exist. A towering humanoid figure over 18 feet tall, painted in white and red pigment, with a round, featureless head, no visible mouth or nose, and what looked unmistakably like some kind of helmet. Local Tuareg guides had a name for it already, passed down through generations. They called it the Great Martian God. The painting is real. It's still there today in a rock shelter called Tin Tazarift in the Tassili Niger plateau of southern Algeria, and radiocarbon dating of similar artwork in the same region places it at somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 years old. Created by a hunter-gatherer culture thousands of years before anyone in that part of the world is believed to have had any concept of a spacesuit, a helmet, or, frankly, any of the technology the image so eerily resembles. Is it proof that ancient humans, deep in the Sahara, witnessed and painted an actual visitor from another world? Or is it something far more mundane, a shamanic figure, a ritual mask, a spiritual entity from a belief system we simply don't have the cultural context to fully translate anymore? That single painting, and the question it refuses to definitively answer either way, sits at the exact center of one of the strangest, most persistent theories in the entire field of alternative history. That intelligent life from beyond Earth hasn't just visited us once, dramatically, in the modern era of Roswell and grainy photographs, that it's been here, watching, guiding, and occasionally directly interfering with human civilization for millions of years. The theory itself has a name, Ancient Astronaut Theory, and it has a surprisingly specific origin point in modern popular culture, even though its roots reach back much further. In 1968, a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods, arguing that a huge portion of ancient humanity's greatest monuments, religious texts, and mythological accounts of gods descending from the sky were not myths or metaphors at all, but garbled, culturally reinterpreted memories of genuine encounters with technologically advanced extraterrestrial visitors. The book became a massive, unexpected bestseller, translated into dozens of languages, and it essentially created an entire genre of pseudo-archaeological inquiry almost single-handedly. Mainstream historians and archaeologists rejected von Däniken's central claims almost immediately and have continued to reject them in the decades since, pointing out serious factual errors, misrepresented artifacts, and a consistent pattern of interpreting ordinary religious or mythological imagery as literal, coded descriptions of spacecraft and extraterrestrial beings. That rejection is worth stating plainly and upfront, because it matters. But the theory never actually went away. If anything, it's grown, evolving into an entire ecosystem of researchers, television series, and independent investigators who argue that professional archaeology has been too quick to dismiss a genuinely consistent, cross-cultural pattern of evidence that, they argue, deserves a more serious second look than it's historically been given. So let's actually look at it piece by piece, the way any real investigation should, starting with the oldest and strangest evidence on the list. Long before Tassili Niger and long before any written language existed anywhere on Earth, prehistoric cave art across multiple geographically unconnected regions occasionally features figures that modern viewers instinctively read as astronaut-like elongated heads, rounded helmets, strange proportions that don't match ordinary human anatomy. Beyond the Sahara paintings, similar imagery has been identified in rock art sites in Val Camonica in northern Italy, in parts of Australia, and scattered throughout prehistoric sites across the Americas. Mainstream archaeologists studying this same body of art point to something called entoptic phenomena, a well-documented, cross-culturally consistent set of visual patterns, including glowing halos, radiating lines, and abstract geometric shapes, that the human brain reliably generates during altered states of consciousness, whether from ritual trance, sensory deprivation, or the ingestion of psychoactive plants known to have been used by hunter-gatherer cultures around the world. Under this explanation, so-called astronaut figures in ancient arts aren't literal depictions of visitors, but shamanic representations of spirits or deities, rendered using the exact same kind of visual vocabulary that shows up reliably and independently in trance state imagery documented by neuroscientists studying entirely modern subjects. It's a genuinely compelling, evidence-based explanation. But it doesn't erase the fact that separate, unconnected ancient cultures across 3 different continents, working thousands of years apart with no possible contact with one another, all arrived at strikingly similar imagery, round-headed figures with what look like helmets, and that similarity itself remains a real, if not necessarily extraterrestrial, mystery worth sitting with. From cave art, the theory moves into far more literate territory, and this is where things get genuinely more complicated, because now we're dealing with actual written texts rather than ambiguous imagery open to interpretation. Ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets, some of the oldest written records in human history, describe a group of divine or semi-divine beings called the Anunnaki. powerful entities credited in Sumerian mythology with descending from the heavens and playing a direct hand in the creation and early guidance of human civilization. In the 1970s, a researcher named Zecharia Sitchin published an enormously influential series of books arguing that the Anunnaki were not mythological deities at all, but literal extraterrestrial beings from an undiscovered planet within our own solar system, who genetically engineered early humans to serve as a labor force for mining operations on Earth. Sitchin's interpretation of the original Sumerian and Akkadian texts has been overwhelmingly rejected by professional Assyriologists and Sumerologists, who point out that his translations consistently diverge from the accepted, peer-reviewed academic understanding of the cuneiform language itself, and that the Anunnaki, in the actual original texts, are described in terms wholly consistent with the broader Mesopotamian pantheon of gods, comparable to how other ancient cultures describe their own deities, rather than anything specifically describing spacecraft, genetic laboratories, or interplanetary travel. This is one of the clearest, most direct collisions in this entire field between a wildly popular alternative theory and an academic field with the actual linguistic expertise to definitively evaluate it. And the professional consensus here is about as firm and unified as this kind of debate ever gets. But strip away Sitchin's specific interpretation for a moment, and there's still something genuinely interesting sitting underneath it, because the broader theme, gods descending from the sky to intervene directly in human affairs, isn't unique to Sumer at all. It shows up independently in an enormous number of unconnected ancient cultures around the world. Ancient Hindu texts, particularly the Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, contain detailed descriptions of flying vehicles called vimanas, described in some passages as being capable of extraordinary speed, emitting brilliant light, and even, in certain especially vivid sections, unleashing weapons described in terms some modern readers have found unsettlingly close to descriptions of advanced explosive or radiation-based destruction. Ancient astronaut proponents point to these passages as literal, if culturally translated, accounts of actual ancient aircraft and advanced weaponry. Sanskrit scholars and mainstream historians of religion, on the other hand, argue that vimanas function within these texts primarily as divine mythological vehicles belonging to gods and celestial beings, consistent with the broader genre of epic poetry across many ancient cultures, where gods are routinely depicted traveling through the sky in fantastic, larger-than-life vehicles, as a literary and religious device rather than a literal engineering description. Meanwhile, in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Ezekiel contains a genuinely striking passage describing the prophet's vision of a wheel within a wheel, accompanied by 4 living creatures, fire, and a blinding, radiant light descending from the sky. It's a passage that has been interpreted by generations of theologians as profound religious symbolism, and interpreted by a smaller but persistent group of ancient astronaut researchers as a first-hand, awe-struck human description of an encounter with a genuine, technologically advanced flying craft, filtered through the only vocabulary a Bronze Age prophet would have had, available to describe something he had no other framework to explain. Then there's a piece of evidence that doesn't come from ancient art or ancient scripture at all, but from 20th century anthropological fieldwork. And it might be the single strangest entry on this entire list. The Dogon people, an ethnic group living in the West African nation of Mali, maintain a body of traditional cosmological knowledge that includes detailed information about the star system Sirius, specifically the existence of a companion star, now known to astronomers as Sirius B, a faint white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by Western astronomers using telescopic photography in the late 19th century. According to research published by anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germaine Dieterlen in the mid-20th century, and later popularized in a 1976 book called The Sirius Mystery by researcher Robert Temple, Dogon oral tradition described this invisible companion star with a level of specific astronomical accuracy, including claims about its incredibly dense, heavy composition, that seemed to defy any plausible explanation for how a traditional culture without telescopes could have known about it, leading Temple to argue the knowledge could only have come from direct contact with an advanced extraterrestrial source. It's a genuinely compelling claim on its surface, but subsequent anthropological investigation, including field research conducted by Walter Van Beek in the 1990s, specifically to independently verify Griol's original findings, found that other Dogon informants, questioned separately, did not consistently confirm the specific Sirius B details reported decades earlier, raising serious, credible concerns that the original French research team may have inadvertently introduced modern astronomical information into their own questions during the initial interviews, information that Dogon informants may have simply reflected back, consciously or not, in ways later mistaken for pre-existing traditional knowledge. It remains one of the most genuinely contested pieces of evidence in this entire field, not clearly debunked, not clearly confirmed, sitting in an unusually uncomfortable middle ground, even by the standards of a topic defined almost entirely by uncomfortable middle ground. Beyond mythology and oral tradition, ancient astronaut theory also leans heavily on physical artifacts and monuments that seem, on the surface, too advanced for the eras and cultures that produced them, several of which genuinely do puzzle mainstream researchers, even without any extraterrestrial explanation attached. The Nazca Lines in Peru, the massive geoglyphs carved into the desert floor that are only fully visible from high above, have long been cited by ancient astronaut proponents as landing strips or navigational markers meant to be seen by visitors arriving from the sky, a claim mainstream archaeologists reject, pointing instead to strong evidence connecting the lines to ceremonial pathways and ritual practices tied to water and fertility, walked, rather than viewed, by a culture with documented, testable surveying techniques capable of producing figures this large, without ever needing to see them from above at all. The stone platform at Baalbek, in modern Lebanon, with its trilithon blocks weighing an estimated 800 tons each and a nearby abandoned stone estimated at close to 1,000 tons, remains a site where even mainstream engineers acknowledge real, unresolved questions about exactly how ancient builders moved stones of that scale using the tools historically attributed to them, questions that ancient astronaut researchers point to as evidence of outside assistance, and that more conventional researchers attribute to lost, highly sophisticated human engineering traditions rather than anything otherworldly. And the Antikythera mechanism, the 2,000-year-old bronze analog computer pulled from a Greek shipwreck, capable of astronomical calculations that Europe wouldn't match again for well over 1,000 years, gets cited constantly in this genre as technology simply too advanced for its era to have emerged organically, even though the device itself, once you actually study its construction, uses gear-based mechanical principles that, while extraordinarily sophisticated for a Hellenistic Greek workshop, are fully explainable through known ancient Greek mathematical and mechanical knowledge, without requiring any outside technological transfer at all. It's worth pausing here and being honest about something, because this genre of content tends to blur an important distinction. There's a real, meaningful difference between artifacts and sites that are genuinely difficult to fully explain, where legitimate researchers on multiple sides of a debate are still actively working through incomplete evidence, and artifacts that have already been thoroughly, definitively explained through conventional archaeology, chemistry, or engineering, but continue to get presented as unsolved mysteries anyway because the mystery version simply makes for better television. The so-called crystal skulls, elaborately carved quartz skulls, once claimed to be pre-Columbian Mesoamerican artifacts of mysterious, possibly extraterrestrial origin, fall firmly into that second category. Modern forensic and materials analysis, including detailed examination conducted by the Smithsonian Institution and the British Museum using electron microscopy, identified clear, unmistakable tool marks on several of the most famous specimens consistent with rotary lapidary equipment that simply didn't exist anywhere in the pre-Columbian Americas, definitively confirming that the skulls were manufactured, likely in Europe, sometime in the 19th century, using entirely modern tools. That conclusion isn't controversial or contested within the relevant scientific fields. It's settled. And it's a useful, sobering reminder that not everything presented as an ancient mystery genuinely still is one. So where does honest, careful investigation actually leave this whole theory, taken as a complete picture rather than a single cherry-picked artifact at a time? The scientific case for ancient extraterrestrial visitation, evaluated by the standards professional archaeology, linguistics, and astronomy, actually require for a claim this significant, remains fundamentally unproven. And the specific evidence most commonly cited to support it, Sitchin's Sumerian translations, the crystal skulls, the Abydos helicopter carving, has, in several of the most prominent individual cases, been directly and convincingly contradicted by dedicated, transparent scientific investigation. That matters, and it shouldn't be waved away or softened just because the alternative explanation is less exciting. But it's also worth acknowledging honestly that the broader question sitting underneath all of this, whether humanity has ever been visited by intelligence from beyond our own planet, isn't actually a fringe question at all once you step outside the specific, flawed evidence ancient astronaut theorists tend to rely on. It's a question serious astrophysicists take completely seriously, for entirely separate, much more rigorous reasons. The universe is almost incomprehensibly vast, containing by current estimates somewhere in the range of 2 trillion galaxies, each one home to hundreds of billions of stars, an enormous number of which we now know, through direct telescopic observation over just the past 3 decades, host their own orbiting planets. Astronomer Frank Drake's famous equation, developed in 1961, specifically to estimate the likely number of detectable communicating civilizations that might exist within our own galaxy alone, produces a range of possible outcomes that, even under fairly conservative assumptions, suggests we are almost certainly not the only intelligent life to have ever existed across the sheer scale of cosmic time and space involved. And that statistical likelihood sits in genuine uncomfortable tension with what's known as the Fermi paradox, first articulated by physicist Enrico Fermi in 1950, essentially asking if intelligent life is even reasonably likely to exist elsewhere, given how enormous and how old the universe actually is, then where is everybody? Why has humanity, despite decades of dedicated searching through programs like SETI, scanning the sky for any signal, any transmission, any unambiguous evidence of an intelligent, technological civilization beyond our own, found precisely nothing definitive at all? Maybe the honest answer is simply distance and time, that the universe is so vast, and the window during which any two civilizations might exist simultaneously and within detectable range of each other is so narrow that contact statistically remains extraordinarily unlikely, regardless of how many civilizations may have existed or may still exist somewhere out there. Maybe it's simpler still, that intelligent technological life is genuinely far rarer than the raw numbers alone suggest, undone by evolutionary bottlenecks or civilizational collapse long before it ever develops the capability to reach across interstellar distances. Or maybe, and this is where the ancient astronaut theorists and the mainstream astrophysicists end up circling strangely close to the exact same unanswered question from two completely different directions. Contact happened already, at some point deep in humanity's past, so long ago and so thoroughly reshaped by millennia of oral retelling, religious reinterpretation, and cultural translation, that all that's left of it now is scattered across cave walls in the Sahara, buried in Sumerian cuneiform, embedded in Sanskrit epics, and remembered, however imperfectly, as gods descending from the sky. Nobody on any credible side of this debate actually has a definitive answer to that question. Not the archaeologists, not the astrophysicists, and certainly not the popular television series that have built entire careers presenting speculation with the visual confidence of settled fact. What we do have is an unusually persistent, genuinely fascinating pattern stretching across cultures separated by oceans, deserts, and thousands of years of history, with no possible means of contacting one another, all independently arriving at strikingly similar stories about beings descending from the heavens to watch over, shape, or intervene in human affairs. That pattern alone doesn't prove ancient aliens ever visited Earth, but it does suggest that whatever human beings, in wildly different corners of the ancient world, were genuinely trying to describe when they looked up at the sky and reached for their oldest, most powerful stories, it was something that felt real enough and important enough to carve into solid rock, and important enough that we're clearly, evidently, still not entirely finished trying to figure out exactly what it actually was.